Hello, my name is Mark. Two professors, each with their own prediction model for the presidential election, have never been in conflict before. They've called a lot of races, including Donald Trump winning in 2016, in spite of all the polls and the pundits. This year, however, one predicts President Trump will win and win big. The other one predicts that Biden will win. So, which professor, which model is correct? I'll show you. Both of these models have only been wrong once, when they both were wrong at the same time, and when they predicted a popular vote winner and not the Electoral College winner. The first professor that we'll discuss is Professor Norpoth from the Stony Brook University on Long Island. His model is called the primary model. It's a statistical model that uses information from presidential primaries and the election cycle. He predicts that Donald Trump will win re-election, and he gives that a 91% chance. He also provides Electoral College results. He expects Donald Trump to get 362 Electoral College votes, and that means Vice President Biden will get 176. The second professor is Professor Alan Lichtman of American University in Washington, D.C. His model is called the 13 Keys to the White House, and he and his model have been correct 8 out of the last 9 presidential elections. The one time he wasn't was in the 2000 election, when he also called the popular vote. Professor Lichtman says that his model relies upon the performance of the party that's in control of the White House, and that the campaigns, either by the challenger or the incumbent party or persons, has basically no impact upon the election results. His presidential election prediction for 2020 is that former Vice President Biden wins the election. I have not seen any Electoral College prediction by Professor Lichtman. So why are the two results of these models so different this year? Taking a look at Professor Norpoth's model, the primary model, I saw that it was relatively simple, based upon numbers for the most part, and could not uncover anything that I thought was wrong with how he did his own process. Professor Lichtman's model is not as simple. A little bit more complex, but pretty interesting. So I watched with interest as he discussed his prediction on many different interviews that he did with all the mainstream media and many YouTube channels. Time and time again, though, I was looking forward to probing questions on the part of the journalists, and I saw none. They just accepted whatever he said. So I bought his book called The 13 Keys to the White House. So I decided to conduct a peer review of my own on Professor Lichtman's results. My background: I have a bachelor's in physical oceanography. I have an MBA. I'm a retired Navy officer. I've run nuclear power plant organizations where your decisions are important and you are held accountable if you're wrong. When I took a look at the book, The 13 Keys to the White House by Professor Lichtman, I confirmed my concerns with regard to how he used his own methodology to come up with determinations different than what I would. Let's go over the keys and I'll tell you what my results are. The first thing to discuss, though, is the scoring that Professor Lichtman's model uses. Yes, there are 13 keys, but it's not a get 7 and you get the prediction. If you're the incumbent party, in this case Republicans, and President Trump, according to Professor Lichtman's model, you need 8 keys in your favor. If you're the challenger, in this case Democrats and former Vice President Biden, you need 6 keys in order to be predicted to win. Key number 1, the party mandate. This one is related to the number of House seats that the party in the White House loses or gains. In the case of the Republicans, in 2016, they actually lost 6 seats in Congress. And in 2018, they lost the House by losing 42 seats. Therefore, the party mandate key goes to Mr. Biden. Key number 2, nomination contests. What this one is whether or not the incumbent, in this case President Trump, had any serious challenges during the primaries for the Republican nomination. President Trump did not, and therefore this one goes to President Trump. And oh, by the way, on key number 2, according to Professor Lichtman, this one is the best predictor overall of any of the keys of the incumbent winning re-election. Key number 3, incumbency. In other words, is the president sitting in the White House the one running for election? This one goes to President Trump. Key number 4, third party. Because there is no significant challenge to President Trump from a third party or independent party, this key is awarded to President Trump. Key number 5, short-term economy. In reality, it really comes down to whether or not the country is in a recession, as well as what is the public perception. As Professor Lichtman points out, if the public perceives that we are, quote, mired in a recession, unquote, it doesn't really matter if we're in or out of a recession. Professor Lichtman awarded this one to former Vice President Biden on the basis that the pandemic had pushed the country into a recession. However, two things. One, the data indicate that we are out of a recession probably as of early July. The Bureau of Economic Analysis with the federal government is the one that gets to officially determine that. And they do that at the end of each quarter and they look back at the months. So it doesn't matter if it's July 1st or July 31st, it'll be July. It might even have been June. I believe the country, number one, is out of recession, and number two, based upon interaction with people and my travels and friends and family, and looking at the stock market and news, I don't see that the general public believes that we are mired in a recession. I give this one to President Trump. It's our first disagreement between Professor Lichtman and myself. Key number 6, long-term economy. Has the gross domestic product per capita been better during this 4-year term than the 8 years previously? During the President Obama 8 years, gross domestic product went up by 3.66% overall, according to my numbers. During the first 3 years of President Trump's administration, gross domestic product, GDP, went up 7.73%. So in his 3 years, he did twice as well as President Obama did in his 8 years. So he had this one in the bag until the pandemic came to our country. In the year 2020, we went down by 5% GDP in the first quarter and down by 32.9% in GDP in the second quarter. The excess gain that President Trump had over President Obama's 8 years and President Trump's 3 years negates the 5% decline basically in the first quarter. So what we have to do is take a look at the third and fourth quarters, because remember, it has a lot to do with perception of the public, what's really going on in their pocketbooks, and what's the data. It appears that the forecast for the third quarter is somewhere above 20%, a very significant increase in GDP. Could be above 30%. My expectation, based upon my looking at the data, is that between the third and fourth quarters of 2020, we will overcome the negative GDP because of the pandemic. Couple that with the fact that President Trump has been actively involved in attempting to correct that situation. I give this one to President Trump also. Key number 7, major policy change. President Trump, in Professor Lichtman's words, has fundamentally changed the policies of the Obama era. Key number 8, social unrest. This one really looks to see if there's any sustained civil unrest, and the answer is yes, there is. I recognize that many people's opinions would be that there are reasons why the civil unrest, the social unrest, or the violence has continued, but whatever the reasons, there is ongoing social unrest. In accordance with the way Professor Lichtman created this key does go to former Vice President Biden. Key 9, scandal. Professor Lichtman says that President Trump has a major scandal. He was impeached by the House. Professor Lichtman, in 2017, published a book entitled The Case for Impeachment. This was the year that President Trump was inaugurated, and Professor Lichtman put out a book about impeaching him. A write-up about Professor Lichtman's The Case for Impeachment book also says the book is so important because of the credibility of Professor Lichtman's accurate prediction of presidential election outcomes. Remember, this is the same prediction model that has never been in conflict with Professor Norpoth's primary model. This is the first time they've been in conflict. Let me point out that in Professor Lichtman's book, The 13 Keys to the White House, that was written many years before the case for impeachment, it says very clearly that in order for a major scandal to be considered a major scandal, it has to be bipartisan. There is no bipartisanship going on in Congress. In fact, the scandal is really on the Democrat side. Key 10. Foreign or military failure. There has been no significant foreign or military failure. Therefore, this key goes to President Trump. Key 11. Foreign or military success. According to Professor Lichtman, President Trump's administration has not had any significant foreign or military success. I disagree. I believe President Trump and his administration have had lots of foreign and military successes. I call not having a war with North Korea a military success, especially since President Obama, if I recall properly, told the new President Trump that that was the number one concern he had. The list is long of what President Trump has accomplished while in office. However, reading the notes associated with this one in Professor Lichtman's book, the main thing that comes out to me is that the mainstream media has either not reported or underreported or belittled almost everything that President Trump has done. Based upon this, I believe that this one does go to former Vice President Biden because of the bias of the mainstream media. Key 12. Incumbent Charisma. Professor Lichtman awards this one to Vice President Biden because he says that even though President Trump is charismatic, it's only to his own base. I reviewed all the information about this one that I could find that Professor Lichtman provides in his book, The 13 Keys of the White House. And even though I have difficulty with this one, I do support Professor Lichtman's decision that this one goes to former Vice President Biden. Key 13, Challenger Charisma. I agree totally with Professor Lichtman in that, as he stated in an interview, former Vice President Biden is neither inspirational nor charismatic, even though Professor Lichtman did also say that he's a nice guy. Therefore, this one goes to President Trump. President Trump is predicted to win the election in 2020. Remember, Professor Lichtman awarded President Trump 6 keys. And as I previously stated, Professor Norpoth predicts a big win for President Trump. I actually could convince myself that former Vice President Biden only really gets 1 key, the mandate key, the one where the Republicans lost House seat. President Trump's charisma is pretty good for the whole nation. The fact that he promises things and gets them done, he's transparent, he tells you what he thinks. The key regarding social unrest, I think Professor Lichtman is going to say after the election that one actually caused upwelling of support for President Trump, who is campaigning on law and order. Foreign and military successes. President Trump has had a long litany of those, and as I said in my previous discussion about this, I actually believe that the general populace of the United States sees it. So what would cause Professor Lichtman not to answer these things the way that his own guidance says? That would be just conjecture on my part. But he sure did have a lot of interviews on mainstream media news outlets, as well as a bunch of YouTube news channels. And Professor Norpoth didn't really. So maybe that's part of it. However, having said all that, maybe it's just wishful thinking on his part. But here's the thing. The harm is that it's just another piece of the information being given out to the world that is not correct. It's not accurate. Why would somebody come up with a prediction that says that former Vice President Biden is going to win? Because they want him to win. I believe that it is important to be honorable and do things accurately. I believe that everything we say or do, or don't say and don't do, has an impact of some kind. This prediction is advertised, it has credibility. Now, I sincerely believe that Professor Lichtman, either just prior to the election or right after it, is going to say, President Trump is going to win, or, this is the reason why my prediction is still correct. It won't float with me. However, I do need to thank Professor Lichtman and Professor Norpoth because of the conflict between their two predictions. And because of Professor Lichtman's interviews, I've created my first YouTube video, and I now have a channel, Honor and Knowledge.